I was on a flight back home, feeling pretty good about myself. The business trip had gone well, and I was eager to get back to my house, the one place that still felt like mine after the mess of the divorce. The courts had been clear. The house belonged to me, and despite my ex-wife, Jessica, trying to get her hands on it during the divorce, she walked away with nothing more than what was legally hers. I had thought that chapter was closed. Turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. When I pulled into my driveway, something fell off. The front lawn looked different, like someone had started taking care of it, something I hadn't bothered with since the divorce. I shook it off, thinking maybe the neighbors had been kind enough to maintain it while I was away. But as I walked up to the front door, my key wouldn't fit. At first, I thought I had grabbed the wrong one from my bag, but after fumbling with all my keys, reality hit me. The locks had been changed. I pounded on the door, anger and confusion swirling in my chest. A man answered, someone I had never seen before. He looked as surprised as I felt. "Can I help you?" he asked, narrowing his eyes like I was the one intruding. "This is my house," I stammered. "What are you doing here?" He frowned, arms crossed. "No, this is my house. I bought it 2 weeks ago." The pit in my stomach grew deeper. "What do you mean you bought it?" "That's impossible. I didn't sell it." He looked at me like I was crazy, then closed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned. The house I had fought to keep, the house the court had ruled was mine, was gone, and I had no idea how it had happened. For a few minutes, I stood on the porch, staring at the front door, trying to process what had just occurred. Was this some sort of cruel joke? Maybe it was a mistake, but how could a mistake like this happen? The thought of Jessica, my ex-wife, flashed through my mind, but even she wouldn't go this far, right? I fumbled for my phone, trying to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. The more I stood there, the more I realized I needed answers. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. My house, my home, was no longer mine, and the new owner clearly wasn't interested in hearing my side of the story. I called Jessica, my ex-wife, thinking maybe she had something to do with this, but she didn't answer. That's when it hit me. Jessica had always been bitter about losing the house. During the divorce, she fought tooth and nail to get it, but the court saw through her attempts. The property was mine, plain and simple. But if there was anyone who would stoop low enough to pull something like this, it was her. The next morning, I went straight to the county clerk's office to pull the property records. Sure enough, there was a new deed with my signature on it, but it wasn't my signature. Someone had forged my name, and that someone was undoubtedly Jessica. I couldn't believe she had gone this far. Selling a house behind someone's back? This was beyond the typical divorce drama. It was criminal. I immediately called my lawyer, who was as shocked as I was. "We'll need to gather evidence of the forgery and file a motion to void the sale," he said calmly. But his voice didn't match the panic I felt building in my chest. "This isn't something we can fix overnight." That was the understatement of the century. I was about to dive headfirst into a legal nightmare, all thanks to my ex-wife's spite. Over the next few days, I discovered just how deep this mess went. Jessica had forged my signature on several documents, everything from the sale agreement to the title transfer. She had used my personal information to finalize the deal, even going as far as hiring a shady notary to sign off on the whole thing. I thought about the new owner, the man who now believed he owned my house. It wasn't his fault. He had bought it in good faith, completely unaware of the fraudulent scheme. But that didn't change the fact that I had been stripped of my home without ever knowing it was happening. I felt powerless, as if my entire life had been ripped out from under me in an instant. The legal battle was just beginning, and I knew it wasn't going to be an easy fight. Jessica had taken things too far this time, and while I was determined to get my house back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. Every step of the process felt like walking through quicksand, and no matter what I did, it seemed like the situation was only getting worse. I couldn't help but wonder, how had Jessica pulled this off without me knowing? What else was she capable of? And most importantly, would I ever get my home and my life back? As I began to piece everything together, the scale of Jessica's deception became painfully clear. She hadn't just forged my signature. She had constructed an entire narrative to make the sale appear legitimate. There were fake documents, fabricated letters, and even notarized forms claiming I had granted her power of attorney while I was out of town. It was a well-executed plan, and it made me sick to think of how long she had been plotting this while I naively believed our divorce had settled things. My next step was to contact the realtor involved in the sale. When I first reached her, she was defensive, refusing to believe that she had been involved in anything illegal. "Look, everything checked out. The paperwork was in order, and your ex-wife said you were aware of the sale," she said, her tone sharp. But when I showed her the undeniable proof of forgery, including my real signature for comparison. Her expression shifted. I could see the realization sink in. She had been duped just like me. I should have known something was off, she muttered, flipping through the stack of documents Jessica had provided. Your ex handled everything. She said you were busy with work and out of town, so she had power of attorney to handle the sale. She was convincing, I repeated bitterly. That was Jessica's specialty, being charming and persuasive when it suited her. It was how she had manipulated people for years, and now she had taken it to a criminal level. The realtor apologized, but it didn't change the fact that I was still locked in a legal battle. My lawyer filed a motion to void the sale, but it was going to take time, and the burden of proof was on me to show that the entire transaction was fraudulent. Meanwhile, the new owner was digging his heels in, refusing to believe he had been scammed. Jessica's web of lies was intricate, and I found myself drowning in legal paperwork, trying to unravel it all. Every new document I uncovered revealed just how deep her manipulation went. She had fabricated letters to make it seem like I had willingly handed over control of my house to her. She had forged witness signatures and somehow managed to find a notary who was either complicit or completely negligent. I was livid, but beneath the anger was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Jessica and I had once shared a life together, built a home, and now she had destroyed it in the most underhanded way possible. The house wasn't just a physical structure. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, and she had stolen that from me. As the weeks dragged on, I started to realize that Jessica wasn't just trying to take my house. She was trying to ruin me. It wasn't enough for her to lose in the divorce. She wanted to see me struggle, to see me broken. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Determined to fight back, I began gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I contacted the notary who had signed off on the sale and demanded answers. The conversation was tense, but she eventually admitted that Jessica had rushed her through the process, claiming it was urgent. It was clear she hadn't done her due diligence. With my lawyer's help, I filed a lawsuit against Jessica for fraud, intent on holding her accountable for every lie she had told. But I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. Jessica had left behind a mess of legal complications, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I couldn't believe how far she had gone out of spite. But if she thought I was just going to roll over and accept it, she was dead wrong. After days of silence, Jessica finally called me back, her voice laced with an unsettling sweetness, as if nothing was wrong. "Why are you blowing up my phone?" she asked, feigning innocence. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I was done playing games. "You sold my house behind my back, Jessica. What the hell were you thinking?" There was a pause, long enough for me to feel the tension rise. Then her tone shifted, cold, sharp, and dripping with resentment. "Oh, our house? You mean the house I deserved in the divorce, but didn't get? That house?" Her audacity hit me like a punch in the gut. My mind raced as I tried to contain my anger. The court ruled it was mine. You had no right, no legal right to sell it. Do you even realize what you've done? Too bad, she shot back, her voice now devoid of any pretense. It's done. Maybe if you'd treated me better, this wouldn't have happened. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, her words slicing through me like a knife. This wasn't about the house, it was about revenge. Jessica couldn't stand the idea of losing, so she had taken matters in her own hands, even if it meant breaking the law. I didn't deserve this? What the hell is wrong with you? I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. You forged my signature, Jessica. You committed fraud. Do you even realize the mess you're in? She let out a bitter laugh. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Always playing the victim. Well, let's see how you like being on the losing end for once. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching me unravel. This isn't over, I growled. You're going to pay for this, Jessica. I'm taking you to court, and you're going to face criminal charges. Her response was chilling. Good luck with that? She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in the middle of my empty apartment, seething with anger. I knew then that Jessica wasn't just bitter. She was out for blood, and she didn't care who she had to hurt to get what she wanted. But this wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was about principle. She had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I sat down and immediately called my lawyer, filling him in on the conversation. Fraud, forgery, possibly identity theft, he said, scribbling notes. She's really dug herself into a hole here. She's acting like it's no big deal, I said, pacing the room. Like she can just walk away from this without any consequences. She won't, my lawyer assured me. We're going to make sure of that. As I hung up the phone, I knew I was about to enter a long, painful legal battle. But Jessica had underestimated me. She thought she could destroy my life and walk away unscathed, just like she always had. But this time, she was wrong. The legal battle to reclaim my house was a nightmare. My lawyer, an experienced litigator, worked around the clock to gather the evidence we needed to prove that Jessica had forged my signature and sold the property illegally. Every day felt like an uphill climb. Each new document we discovered seemed to reveal just how deep her deceit went. She had fabricated documents, lied to the realtor, and falsified power of attorney paperwork. The web of lies she had spun was massive. But what made the process even more complicated was the new owner, a guy named Adam. He had bought the house in good faith, not knowing that the entire transaction was fraudulent. I couldn't blame him. He had no reason to think anything was wrong, and now he was caught in the middle of a legal mess that he didn't deserve. But as much as I felt for him, this was my home, and I wasn't about to let Jessica's scheme rob me of it. The court hearings were tense. Adam's lawyer argued that he had no idea the sale was fraudulent, and under the law, he had rights to the property too. It was a complex situation, and I could see how this battle wasn't just about Jessica's fraud anymore. It was about sorting out a legal mess that impacted innocent people. But I couldn't give up. My house was on the line, and I was determined to fight for it. Jessica, on the other hand, showed no remorse. Each time we faced each other in court, she looked at me with that smug smile, like this was all a game to her. It was infuriating. She didn't care about the legal consequences, the financial damage, or the emotional toll it was taking on me. All she cared about was getting back at me for winning the divorce. As the months passed, the toll of the legal battle started to weigh heavily on me. The constant back and forth between lawyers, the mounting legal fees, the uncertainty of whether I would ever get my house back. It all became overwhelming. But I refused to let Jessica win. I refused to let her walk away from this unscathed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a crucial turning point. My lawyer had managed to gather enough evidence to prove beyond a doubt that Jessica had forged my signature. The judge, recognizing the fraud, ruled in my favor, voiding the sale. However, the battle wasn't over yet. The new owner, Adam, was still entitled to compensation, and now I was responsible for buying him out of the property. Another financial blow, but at least I was getting my house back. Jessica, meanwhile, sat in the courtroom, her smug smile finally gone. The judge didn't just void the sale. He referred her case for criminal investigation. She had committed fraud, and she wasn't going to walk away from this without facing serious legal consequences. As I left the courthouse that day, a sense of relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. The house was mine again, but the emotional and financial toll had been enormous. Jessica's betrayal had pushed me to the edge, but I had made it through. Now, she was the one facing the consequences. After months of stress and uncertainty, we finally had a breakthrough. My lawyer, relentless in his pursuit of justice, uncovered something crucial. Jessica had made a critical mistake in her web of deceit. While her fraudulent sale had been meticulously planned, she had gotten sloppy with some of the finer details. Emails, fake notaries, and most damning of all, a power of attorney document that was poorly forged. The evidence piled up faster than I had anticipated. In the end, the paper trail led directly to her. It was a mix of arrogance and carelessness on Jessica's part, thinking no one would ever piece together her lies. My lawyer presented everything in court. Emails between Jessica and a shady notary service, altered bank statements, and the signature forgery that was central to the entire case. Each document was like a puzzle piece falling into place. I'll never forget the look on Jessica's face when the judge ruled in my favor. The smugness that had been her constant shield throughout this ordeal cracked the moment she realized it was all unraveling. There was no more pretending, no more manipulation. The sale was officially voided. The house was mine again. The new owner, Adam, was understandably furious when the truth came out. He had been caught up in a scam without realizing it, and though the judge ruled that the sale was null and void, the financial damage he had suffered was substantial. While the court made it clear that Jessica's actions were to blame, Adam still felt cheated by the whole situation. I couldn't blame him. In the end, he was the collateral damage of Jessica's vendetta, and I agreed to compensate him for the inconvenience. It wasn't a legal requirement, but it felt like the right thing to do. The relief of winning back my home was real, but it was bittersweet. The financial strain of months of legal fees weighed heavily on me, and the emotional toll had been far worse than I could have imagined. This house, the place I had fought so hard to keep, was now tainted by the ordeal Jessica had put me through. As I stood in my empty living room, back in the home that was once again mine, it felt hollow. I had won the legal battle, but I had lost something deeper along the way. The sense of security and peace that this home once gave me was gone, replaced by the memories of betrayal and deceit. But this time, at least, justice had been served. Jessica's actions were being investigated for criminal fraud, and while that process was still ongoing, it gave me a sense of closure to know she wouldn't get away with what she had done. I had my house back, but it wasn't just about the bricks and mortar. It was about standing up for myself, proving that I wouldn't let anyone, not even someone I once loved, take advantage of me again. After the court's ruling, Jessica's world began to unravel faster than even I could have anticipated. The investigation into her fraudulent actions was swift, and within weeks, she was formally charged with forgery and fraud. For someone who had always managed to manipulate her way out of consequences, this was the moment when reality came crashing down on her. Gone was the smug arrogance that had defined her throughout our divorce and the subsequent fallout. Jessica was now facing real, tangible consequences, something she had never imagined would happen. The mask she had worn for so long, convincing everyone around her that she was always in control, had finally slipped. And what was left was someone desperate, cornered, and out of options. The legal system didn't go easy on her. The forgery alone was serious enough to warrant significant jail time, but the fraudulent sale of the house added another layer of severity to her crimes. Her lawyers tried to negotiate for leniency, claiming that she had been emotionally unstable due to the divorce and wasn't thinking clearly when she orchestrated the entire scheme. But it was obvious that the court had little sympathy for her manipulations. This wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated, calculated, and malicious. During this time, Jessica reached out to me multiple times, texts, calls, emails. At first, I ignored them, but as her desperation grew, so did the intensity of her messages. She begged me to help her, claiming that we could fix this if I just forgave her. She said that we could move on from everything if I just let the court know that I didn't want to press charges. It was the ultimate irony. Jessica, who had spent months tearing my life apart, now wanted me to save her from the wreckage she had caused. But I was done. Done being manipulated, done being used. I had given her every chance during our marriage, during the divorce, and even after the house debacle, to come clean and take responsibility. She had squandered every single opportunity. One evening, she called me again, her voice shaking with fear. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, we can make this right, she pleaded. I don't deserve this. I listened for a moment, letting her words sink in, but there was no spark of sympathy left in me. You did this to yourself, Jessica. I'm not your savior anymore, I said, my voice cold but steady. You crossed a line that you can't come back from, and now you're going to have to face the consequences. There was silence on the other end of the line before she hung up without another word. It was the last time I heard from her. With Jessica facing criminal charges, the fallout extended far beyond just our personal relationship. She lost her job, friends distanced themselves from her, and her family, once her biggest supporters, cut ties when they realized just how deep her deceit ran. The Jessica who had once controlled every aspect of her life with confidence was now a shell of her former self, alone and without the safety net she had always relied on. I felt no joy in her downfall. If anything, it felt like a tragic end to what had once been a hopeful chapter in both of our lives. But that hope had long since evaporated, replaced by betrayal and resentment. Jessica's fall from grace wasn't something I celebrated, but it was a reminder of how far someone could spiral when they let bitterness and spite consume them. In the end, Jessica was left to face the full weight of her choices, while I began to rebuild my life, finally free from her manipulations. Getting my house back felt like a hollow victory. The legal battle was over, Jessica was out of my life, and justice had been served, but standing in the house didn't bring the peace I expected. Every room held a memory of the chaos, the betrayal, and the legal nightmare she had caused. Instead of feeling like a refuge, the place felt like a monument to everything I wanted to forget. I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't rebuild my life while surrounded by the remnants of everything that had gone wrong. So, I made the decision to sell the house. Not out of necessity, but because it was time to let go. Holding on to it felt like holding on to the past, and I was ready to move forward. I listed it with a real estate agent, and within a few months, it was sold. With the sale of the house came a sense of relief, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I used the money to buy a smaller place, something simpler and more manageable. It wasn't about starting over from scratch, but more about creating a life that was truly mine, without the shadow of Jessica hanging over everything. The new house felt different. It was quieter, more peaceful, and for the first time, I could breathe again. I started focusing on myself, reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from during the divorce and legal mess, picking up hobbies I had abandoned, and finding joy in the simple things. I took up hiking, joined a local sports league, and began to rebuild my social life. One of the most significant changes was the shift in my mindset. The ordeal had forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't acknowledged. My need for control, my tendency to avoid conflict until it became unavoidable, and my reluctance to stand up for myself in the face of manipulation. But now, I was learning to recognize my boundaries and protect them. Jessica's betrayal had been the ultimate test, but it taught me a lesson I wouldn't forget: the importance of knowing when to let go. I had spent so much time fighting to keep the house, fighting to prove a point, when in the end, it wasn't the house that mattered. It was reclaiming my life. Moving forward wasn't just about physical space, it was about reclaiming my emotional space as well. I let go of the anger, the resentment, and the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything still felt heavy, but I was determined not to let it define me anymore. As time passed, I found peace in the small moments, in the quiet of my new home, in the laughter of old friends, in the freedom to rebuild my life on my terms. Jessica was a part of my past, but she no longer had power over my future. For the first time in years, I was moving forward, and this time I was doing it for me. Life after Jessica felt like stepping into a new world, one where I was no longer weighed down by her manipulations or the constant turmoil she brought into my life. The legal battle had been brutal, but it had forced me to grow, to stand up for myself in ways I hadn't before. I had come out of it with a clearer sense of who I was and what I wanted, and for the first time in years, I was moving forward with purpose. My friends and family had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal. They stood by me, offering support when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Without them, I don't think I would have been able to keep going. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight, and that there was still so much more to life than the pain Jessica had caused. In the months following the sale of the house and my fresh start in my new place, I found myself in a routine that felt comforting. I focused heavily on my career, pouring my energy into projects that challenged me and gave me a sense of accomplishment. Work had always been a steady constant in my life, and now it was something I could dive into without the distractions of personal chaos. Dating was another step forward, though I approached it cautiously. I wasn't ready to rush into anything serious, but I knew I didn't want to close myself off either. The first few dates were awkward. After all, trust didn't come easily anymore, but I started meeting people who reminded me that not everyone was like Jessica. Slowly, I began to open myself up again, though I kept my guard up, making sure not to fall into old patterns. Through it all, I began to realize that life after Jessica wasn't just about finding peace. It was about rediscovering joy. I reconnected with hobbies I had forgotten about during the divorce and legal battles. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since college, and found it therapeutic. I started taking weekend trips with friends, enjoying the freedom that came with having no one to answer to but myself. There were still moments of bitterness, especially when I thought about how much time and energy I had wasted fighting Jessica's games. But those moments were fleeting. The further I distanced myself from that part of my life, the more I understood that dwelling on the past would only hold me back. Jessica had taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let her take my future too. The most significant change came in how I viewed myself. For years, I had let Jessica's actions define me. Her betrayal, her deceit, her attempts to control everything. But now, I realized that I was more than the man who had been cheated on or the guy who had to fight for his own house. I was someone who had come out the other side stronger, smarter, and more self-aware. I wasn't the same person I had been when I married Jessica, and that was a good thing. Life after her was about growth, about reclaiming who I was outside of the chaos she had created. It was about moving forward one day at a time and learning to trust in myself again. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what the future held. As time passed, I found myself reflecting less on Jessica and more on the lessons I'd taken from the entire ordeal. Her betrayal, selling the house, forging my signature, and dragging me through a legal nightmare was never just about the property. It was her desperate last-ditch effort to maintain control, to punish me for moving on, and to inflict damage where she thought it would hurt the most. But her obsession with winning ultimately led to her own downfall. In trying to destroy me, she had destroyed herself instead. The day the court finalized her charges and I got my house back, I realized something important. Material possessions, even something as significant as a house, are fleeting. What really matters is the ability to rebuild, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to come out stronger on the other side. I had lost my home for a time, but in the process, I had gained my freedom. Freedom from a toxic relationship, from a cycle of manipulation, and from the bitterness that Jessica had brought into my life for years. For the longest time, I couldn't understand how someone could go so far out of spite, how Jessica could cross so many lines without remorse. But now I've come to accept that not everyone's actions will make sense. Some people, like Jessica, are consumed by their own insecurities and anger, lashing out in ways that ultimately hurt themselves more than anyone else. It's not my job to understand her anymore, nor do I need to. What matters is that I've moved on. I've reclaimed my sense of self and learned to trust in my own resilience. I've rebuilt my life with a new home, surrounded by people who support and respect me. I've cut ties with the toxic past, and in doing so, I've made space for a brighter, more peaceful future. Jessica's downfall was her own doing, but my survival and growth were entirely mine. I may never know why she did what she did, but in the end, it doesn't matter. I'm no longer tied to her manipulations or her bitterness. I'm free, and that freedom is worth far more than anything she ever tried to take from me.